match that in the work that I was doing, so that you really couldn't tell who did the writing. And but we did have at least some information that I could go to with the chart, or more likely, I would just ask, say, okay, here I am, here's the next thing I'm going to wire up, I'm going to do this next room, what happens here, what are the important parts? I have the art usually, or we get from Gary, and he'd been talking to Ron. Gary would often put lots of stuff into the room that wasn't in the design doc, just to make it feel more interesting, so it's up to me to add labels and say funny stuff about that. And when we did Zach, I actually used a project planning software that we had. We had Macintoshes by then, and there was something called Microplanner, which was a commercial product designed to manage very large projects where you had multiple teams doing things, and you could graphically create essentially a dependency chart, and it would automatically connect things, and you could see, when you print out the whole chart, you could see where these fellow points are. Like, everything depends on getting this one thing done, so you better be sure that it's easy to get that, otherwise people are going to get stuck there, and you kind of see the flow of the game overall. And that helped for Zach a lot, because I did have that, and I knew what the flow was, and I could go back to it and I could easily edit that. I don't know if they continued using that beyond. I think we did that. We just did that for Thimbleweed. It's a different kind of stuff. It wasn't project planning in the same way, but it was a graphical view of the game based on things you had to have done before you could move on to the next step. You eventually get to keep it in your head. At first, it's really hard to get your mind around this entire game, but at some point that changes and you really do have it. And I've lost it now. I mean, for example, if I go back and try to remember that, we have to go back to our notes and say, well, what happens when you do this? And so people ask me questions like, back in Zach McCracken, when you have this, what do you do? It's like, I've been playing this game for 30 years. I played it a lot back then, but I don't remember. So I have to go to a walkthrough to get the answer myself, because I don't remember.
Ask him before.
Only keep the stuff in your head for as long as it's important, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? Just a quick one. The game type of point-and-click adventures could be used also for a child and teen project like you and Annie continue to bring on the app on iPad or mobile, or the game type could distract the teens or the child to focus on the main problem. Could be chaotic. I don't know if I explained well, but what I'm trying to say is try to create point-and-click adventure based on child problems and topics. Could be a good idea, or could be something that could bring useless amount of work.
Well, so the question basically is, adapting graphic adventures for kids.
Thank you.
And what interesting that you asked that question. So in 1992, after Ron did the second Monkey Island game, he left Lucasfilm and created his own company called Humongous Entertainment.
Yes.
And he had part of the separation deal was that he could take the Scum engine in its current form with him and use it for junior graphic adventure games, games specifically for kids. And that's what he did. In fact, he hired Annie, my wife, and Lori Bauman, who is Steve Arnold's wife, who both had been working on screenplays for years together, and Lori had a long background of doing interactive Laserdisc titles for trainings. So they ended up working with Ron to do several of the first graphic adventure games for kids, and using basically using Scum as it was then, which had voice and had, but it had the same point-and-click environment. And they were great. They're still being sold. Putt Putt Adventures and Fatty Bear and Freddy Fish, and I think there were a bunch of other ones that were popular. So he did that for multiple years, and then left. I think it got sold to other companies. So whoever's doing it now, they're not creating, I don't think they're creating new content. They're just republishing the stuff from the early to maybe late 90s. I know Annie also did a bunch of other graphic adventure titles.
Yeah.
This is around the time that CD-ROMs were just kicking off, and there's all this extra storage you could use for things, and graphic adventures are great. So she worked on Mr. Potato Head and Madeline, the book Character for Kids, and what am I missing? A bunch of other ones like that. So there were, I don't know if people are still doing those though. It's an interesting question, but they were really big in the 90s.
You could talk about Middle School Confidential. It's
Yeah.
big teens.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, yes. So we've been doing other stuff since then, but not specifically in the adventure game for kids, but still focused on that, kids and more book stuff than adventures. That's interactive. But yeah, I'd like to see more like that, and it's especially I'd like to see. I mean, we get stories all the time of kids playing our games still. Tomorrow I'll probably read a few stories when we talk in my talk tomorrow night. I asked Twitter followers and people on the Thimbleweed Park forum for stories that they had about playing Zach McCracken, and I got some, dozens and dozens of great stories. I can only use a few of the memories, mostly as kids playing these games. So you don't even have to have a game specifically for kids. I don't know, Thimbleweed Park gets a little edgy sometimes, so I probably wouldn't go too young, but I know of kids like 5 or 6 or 7 that were playing it, and with parental supervision. And the biggest barrier there was reading, but because it's all voice acted, you don't really have to read it. And I also get stories of people from all over the planet who learned English by playing our graphic adventure games.
Yeah,
There's
well.
2 people right there.
Yeah.
More. Yeah, which was totally not the intent, but really amazing to hear that. Yeah, it moved me. Someone told me that they became a archaeologist because of Zach, and those things that so far no one's told me they became a tabloid reporter because of Zach, which is good to hear. Yeah, I'm constantly surprised that people still know our games. I mean, I should say this, when we wrote the games, the assumption was that the games would be around for as long as the target platform was around. So when Commodore 64s went away, or when DOS PCs went away, then the games would go away too. And we didn't think about the fact that each generation of computers were significantly more powerful, and you could actually simulate or emulate the old computers and the new computers and have them run way faster than they ever could on the old computers. Plus Scum VM, which basically opened up all of our Scum games to, and this was a crowd-run project. It wasn't authorized by Lucas. They just reverse engineered the entire system, and you can play the games on pretty much any device you want to, from phones. I mean, the first time I saw this was when I was in Oslo in 2004, and when the guy showed me Zach running on a Nokia phone. It was not a smartphone, this was just an old Nokia phone, and with a little joystick thing in the middle that you could control where the cursor was. And I said, oh my God, so people knew the games, years later, and it still amazes me because we thought they would be gone. In the case of film, we can still watch films from the 1920s because the technology is essentially the same, but computers change so fast we thought it would go away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Feel free to ask questions. Don't be embarrassed. I won't bite.
Other questions?
Great for Rookworks as well. It's very, very nice to play.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to pitch that. Before I did Thimbleweed Park, but after I did some of the games based on Annie's books, or programs based on her books, I did, there's this guy named Rube Goldberg, if people heard of him before. Rube Goldberg was a cartoonist, American cartoonist, mostly in the 1930s to 50s is when he was probably most famous. And he did a bunch of comics, cartoons that would be in the newspapers. And the one he became most famous for were these chain reaction machines, where you have crazy, the idea would be open the window, the simple way to open the window. And of course, the simple way is to walk over the window and open it. But his way of doing it would be to have a frog tied to a piece of string. When the frog jumps, it would cause something to fall down and trigger something else, which would trigger a punching glove, which would hit a monkey in the face. The monkey would jump and slip on a banana, and while it's slipping, it would grab onto a bar, which would be tied to the window, and the window would open. And these are called Rube Goldberg machines. And you've all seen probably YouTube videos of these crazy contraptions where you have an extended chain reaction of multiple steps. So I knew I wanted to do a game in that vein, in that style. And when I did the research, I found out that I found games that were similar, but they would say in the style of Rube Goldberg or inspired by Rube Goldberg, but none of them said this is a Rube Goldberg game. They all have this, caveat. Thank you.
Great.
So I found online. I searched and found a RubeGoldberg.com website, and it said, it looked like it was official. And I sent them an email asking if I could use Rube Goldberg's original cartoons from the 1930s to build a game. And got a phone call the next morning from a woman who was talking to me, was very friendly, and about 10 minutes into the conversation, I found out that she was Rube Goldberg's granddaughter, and created a partnership, and I did a game called RubeWorks, which is released in 2013 for iOS and Android, and it's on Steam, so for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And it's a lot of fun. It's mostly used in schools, especially because in the United States, kids actually usually get assignments to build a Rube Goldberg machine, often as a team, to show them about physics and cause and effect and chain reactions and simple machines. And they use the game as a simple way to introduce them to these concepts, where it's very easy to clean up the mess when it doesn't work the first or the 50th time. And then they feel more confident they can actually go and design their own. So had a lot of fun doing that. And it's still on the market.
Thank you.
$2.99, I think, is the price. Yeah, RubeWorks. And I had a lot of fun with that, doing that. That was probably the first game I had done myself in a really long time, in like 15 years.
How did you program it? How did you code it? Did you use an engine or?
So RubeWorks was done in Unity. And in fact, Unity funded it. And so Unity, Tony Garcia was one of the producers at Lucasfilm towards the end, at the time I was there. And he ended up continuing in the game industry, and he was the VP of business development at Unity. And when I was looking for funding to do this game, he had this idea of creating a new group within Unity called Unity Games, where they would publish their own games that they would either fund, and that's where we got the money to do it. Unfortunately, about maybe 6 months after it launched, they decided that it was not something they actually wanted to do anymore. And they closed down Unity Games, and the rights, unfortunately, they closed down Unity Games. Fortunately, the rights reverted back to us. And so now we own the whole thing, free and clear, which is really nice. I think there might have been some conflict because Unity is primarily a tools company for other game developers to build games with. And I think they felt that they would upset a bunch of developers if they were giving special treatment to their own games. And so it's kind of this conflict. They weren't sure which direction they wanted to be, and they felt like they couldn't do both effectively, so they just killed off the whole games part of it. So thank you for that.
I would like to ask you a question. Would it be completely wrong if I said that Indiana Jones is not only an adaptation, but also a very early example of transmedia narrative? I mean, you showed how you readapted, translated in
Yes.
the game, the movie.
Yes.
But at the same time, well, in my opinion, the video game seems to add some original elements to Indiana Jones universe.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I would like you to comment on this. And have you thought about it when you designed the movie, the game?
Well, we knew. So it's really like you're saying essentially that we didn't just translate the movie into a game. We also expanded the universe, and we also gave stuff that you could do that was outside of that. And I think for a movie to be translated into a game, you have to do that, or what's the point? You just go see the movie again, and just to run through a game which is 100% true to the movie is not going to be very fun. So we knew we wanted to make you feel like you were. I mean, here you really are playing Indy in the game. We want to make you feel like you were actually him, and you could do the things he could do, and you could talk in his voice, maybe a funnier version of his voice because of who we were doing this. But we wanted you to feel like you were being him. On the other hand, it's a graphic adventure game which is going to take 30 hours to play, and it's very different than watching a 2-hour movie. So we had to extrapolate. I think pretty much all the locations we used in the game came from the movie, but we had the freedom to expand those. Fortunately or unfortunately, we had a bunch of mazes in there. Same thing for Zach. I mean, two things that I hear as feedback that people didn't like about Zach McCracken were all the mazes we put in. Some people liked them, but most said, I don't know, that's not a maze. Same thing for Indy. We have the catacombs and we have the Nazi castle, which we essentially figured, okay, here's a big space, you have to navigate around it. In the movie, Indy just opens a couple doors and probably finds out where he needs to go, but that's not realistic in an adventure game, so we wanted to actually make you feel like you were exploring and finding it. And trying to find a balance between doing that and without making it too tedious. So there's that, there's the dialogue, there's giving you the choice of the style of gameplay. So this is probably the first adventure game where we had any kind of a fast reaction element of gameplay, but you could mostly avoid the boxing if you don't want to do it, if you wanted to play a different way. One thing we did, which I thought was really interesting, innovative, was we had this thing called Indy Points, where we would track each time you solved a puzzle in a specific one of those 3 styles, and give you a score at the end of the game for all those ways you did it. But we saved that information, so if you replayed the game a second time, and this time you decide to go a different way, you do the boxing instead of the object version of solving puzzles, then you get additional points. And I think the max is maybe 800 if you got a perfect score across, say, 2 or 3 or 4 games, you could get the maximum number of indie points. So we gave you a reason to go back and replay it, because there are other ways to try things. So that's something you wouldn't get in the movie too. So give you the proof, and I think we call it indie quotient, or that was what we did with our kids.
Indie points.
Indie points. So that was another way expansion. But yeah, I think anyone who wants to take that on has to make sure that they're adding something to it way beyond just the original art form.
Thank you.
In relation about this question of the adding something extra movie script, how many times you tested the Hitler's punch face scene?
The which one? The Hitler one, or
the punch one.
Yeah, I was never very good at that, and the code, the punching code, I think Ron wrote that, so I'll let him test that. When I played the game, I probably didn't play it that way. I know what we did. We had a cheat button, so you could do, so if you hit a special 0 or some other button, it would knock him out immediately. So that way you could, say, I don't want to test this part. So I let the bug testers try to help us tune it, and we did it the other way. We kind of split things up. So Ron did the punching code. Noah tended to write most of the dialogue trees. I did a lot of the implementation of the cutscenes and other parts, and we just kind of all did different elements to make it come together pretty well. I don't think Noah did any of the Scum scripting, but he had never done a Scum game, so for him to learn probably didn't make a lot of sense. But this was my third, so I did a lot of that, and of course Ron wrote the system, so he knew how to do that.
Was it nice to see that scene, that moment, that particular moment?
Yeah, it was really good. I'm sure people live for that, the cathartic moment coming out.
I saved it before.
But don't you get shot? You're talking about punching. You get killed after that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah. So if you so for those who don't know, there's a point in the game, in the movie, where Indy sees at a rally, he kind of comes across Hitler, and in the movie, I think what does he do?
Signs a book.
He signs. Hitler thinks he's asking for an autograph.
Yeah.
Is that right?
He wants him
So
to sign his book.
Yeah. So Hitler signs it, and he takes his book away, which is the Grail Diary, which is like the important solution to everything. And Hitler takes away, gives him his autograph, and then gives it back to him. In the game, you have the option of hitting him, because that's always a choice. And of course, if you do, you get machine gunned down immediately. And so, we warn you that. I mean, probably would happen like that in real life too. But it was still, you can still get that punch. Yes.
Just a funny question. There is a word in Zack McCracken, it's a kind of word, that I usually is born for me as a password, because I go inside. They ask me to log in, insert the password. Every time you have to change a password. I tried this password, and the site told me, yeah, great security system, and I use Zlorfik.
Yes, very good.
So I would like to know what's the meaning of Zlorfik. Why is it so? It's a secure word.
Yeah. So in Zack, there's several words which are kind of weird. One of them is Zlorfik, and I think that's probably oh shit in Alien.
Scolarian.
And it's the Caponians, which are the bad aliens, say that often. I don't think Zack ever says that. I think it's just the aliens. So that was. I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but in Zack, after the brainstorming session I had with David Spangler, I spent like 3 months working out the whole game, realizing this is going to be a big game. I don't want to code it all by myself, and I also wanted someone else I could bounce ideas off of. So we brought in Matthew Kane, who's already in. He was actually working in the learning group within Lucasfilm Games, and asked him if he was interested in working with me. I was already friends with him, and he was a great guy. And he said, sure. So we taught him Scum, kind of split up the game so we'd each do different parts. And Slurfic was his word. He wrote that. And I asked him once what it meant. He said, I don't know. He just made it up. As far as I know, there's no Easter eggs, nothing inside of it. Doesn't mean anything. It just was funny. There are some Easter egg words in it, like, what is it? Elvis is king is hidden inside of another phrase. Someone who's a Zach fan, I should write it down, but I can't remember. I can't repeat it off. Yeah, so there are other ones, but that one has no actual meaning that I know of.
Thank you for giving us your password.
Exactly.
We now know how to get in. So we don't know how to spell it,
We
right?
have the time for ask question, maybe?
Any other questions?
Can I ask you, this is a bit more serious. You
Okay.
just said that you thought that one game would last as long as the platform
Yes.
on it still works. How much do you think that a game should become public domain and like a cultural thing after a while? And how much do you think that Nintendo or whoever should still ask you money for it, basically?
Yeah, so the question is really talking about orphan games, games that are really no longer purchasable
Yeah.
on whatever platform it is, and should those become public domain, or should they remain locked up in copyright hell for the rest of history?
Exactly.
And that's a good question. I mean, for a long time, that was the situation for all the graphic adventure Scum games that we did. They weren't being sold in any format. There were usually compendiums of them. Like, you can get like 4 or 5 games on a bunch of CDs for a discount price years after the games were done. That was being produced by Lucasfilm or LucasArts. But at some point they stopped doing that. And for a couple of games they went back and they did remasters or upgraded, like they did that for Monkey Island. But the only way to get them was to get them off of pirate boards or eBay. Pay huge bucks for a version of the game that someone was trying to sell. And people were using the word abandonware, games where the publisher was no longer giving you a legal way to purchase them, and people felt that, okay, well, if that's the case, then I have a right to take it. And I don't know if as it is now, it's interesting. In the case of our games, I think all of them are now available again. You can go onto GOG.com and Steam, and I think there are different combinations of the ones on the different platforms, but I think Maniac Mansion is on Steam. Most of the other graphic adventures we did are on GOG. I actually bought, which one? I think it was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, in order to get some pictures and stuff for this presentation. And I have boxes downstairs. It's okay. It's not worth the effort to. I'd rather pay $6 and just grab a legal version than have to find a way to read 30-year-old discs and try to put them into a computer I don't have. So that's nice that they're available again. But I don't know. It'd be nice if the company found a way to distribute their old titles where you could still get them, but sometimes it takes work to come up with conversions that work in the current platforms. The ones that were released on GOG for graphic ventures, they're using Scum VM to do it. So they didn't have to do any new engineering. They just used the engineering off of the public domain version of Scum that played all these different games.
Actually, oftentimes the versions they use, not of the engine, but of the game itself, it's not really the best one probably to play.
Yeah,
like Loom, for instance.
Okay, well, a weird thing, I'm not sure, someone I saw on one of the Twitter, on Twitter, showed a screen from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Indy, once he leaves Marcus, he walks into the back room to change his clothes, and he comes out wearing his professor gear, suit and tie. And there's a screen that says, "Hi, I'm Indy. Press F5 to save games." Oh, "Hi, I'm Indy. Welcome to my game. Press F5 to save games."
Yes.
And he said, "This is really kind of hokey or corny that they said that." And I said, "I don't remember ever writing that. That wasn't my code. I didn't do that." And I said, "I don't remember that in the game." And I found that either it was a pirate who did that and had the version in order to remove the copy protection, or
Yes.
some Lucasfilm employee years later, when they wanted to release a version without the copy protection, added that too, because you didn't have the manual that came with it. And it made me feel better that it wasn't me who wrote that, but there's probably other stuff that where people hack the games to get rid of the copy protection, that it probably wasn't done in the best way to do that. They might have broken something else.
It's nice.
Interesting.
Nice thought.
So I don't know. What do you think? To your answer to your question.
I'm very happy that I can still play Manic Mansion by Steam or whatever, but I found that some other games that I really like, there's no other way than the wrong way to have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in
It's
Italy.
sad that because some publishers are not available anymore, some systems not really. So,
Right. So it's a dilemma. Yeah.
It's just like until somebody gives me the possibility to have the game, that's fine. But I think there has to be a sort of protections for the games that are not available anymore, like to be saved and
So,
to
so how
survive,
about, so how about this as a solution, is that if you sign a contract with yourself that it's okay to pirate abandonware game as long as you promise to buy it as soon as it becomes available again in some way.
Exactly.
Then I feel like you're doing the best you can. You're getting the game and you're actually
I
buying
usually
it.
like, I still have Manic Mansion.
Yeah.
So, here, so it's not like I pirate anything. I have everything if I can in the original
Yeah, well,
version.
I mean, you just have to buy the game.
And also I found out the other day my son wanted to play Elmo game for Nintendo whatever, that in Italy I can't, it didn't come out, and without an American console I can't play it. So
That's
there
true.
are also those conundrums,
Yeah, there are a lot of emulators for
Yes.
for the
Exactly,
different
that's
machines.
the only way to run it in Italy, because if I buy the console it has to be the American one with the transformer on the TV.
So,
So it's-
I know we're running out of time, I think, pretty soon, but we had this, the whole idea of, the whole concept of piracy is really a touchy one for me, because back in 1983, 84, I guess, we were about to release Rescue on Fractalus and Ballblazer. We were going to release it, and we gave unprotected floppy disks of both games to Atari for the marketing department to help them look at the games and figure out how they should best market the games. And a week later, the games were available on all the best the BBS systems. You could download the games for free, and of course, these were the versions of the game before they had their final titles. They had a bunch of bugs, which we fixed later, but they were, the truth is they were 98% the game that they turned out to be later on. And we could never, since we didn't even consider that someone might do that, we didn't put any kind of serial number or code into the source code or into the code that was on the disk that would have identified the source of it, who we gave it to. Now I think you'd have a serialized version where you would know, oh yeah, this is the one that we gave to Atari, so we know that it's reliable. So I think we were also giving a version out to someone's kids to play, and who really knows who did it. It just seemed like coincidental that it was the week after Atari had it. And we also knew that there was some resentment within Atari that we were getting all this special treatment. So it's possible someone in their testing group or whatever did on purpose to hurt us. So, games came out, if it was a week or so before the final ones, but because of things that happened with Atari, the company changed hands, the agreement we had changed. It took like a whole another year later before the games were actually officially released. So it means that the only way to get the game was to get the pirated version, and people probably played them until they got sick of them, and they never bought the game. So, you know, on the plus side, lots of people knew Lucasfilm Games, but on the negative side, you know, the sales probably were never anywhere as good as they could have been if people actually were pirating them.
Yeah, and just think, I mean, I don't like piracy for actual games, but at the same time, there are some old games I played that are stuck forever in my 486 or whatever, and I feel like it's like a book that was released and doesn't exist anymore, you know?
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of you have to do what
It's a
feels right.
cultural thing
Yes.
more than, it's history now more than, I mean, it's not like the new Super Mario.
Yeah.
It's something that's there and I can't play anymore with the actual computer I have, you know?
Yeah, well, in the case of the games that we released, you know, I don't get any money or anything for any of the games that sold. You know, when I was working at Lucas, all of us were employees, and there were no profit sharings or anything. So, you know, if you go off and GOG and buy Zach, it doesn't benefit me in any way other
Yes.
than you get to play the game. But because of the, because Disney owns the rights, who knows? You know, if enough people buy it, then maybe they will see the value of putting some more money into either doing versions for other platforms. I mean, people say they'd love to see it on the Switch, and if there are enough sales on the games in the cheap way they got to do it, maybe they would actually put money into doing something at some point. So you never know.
Okay, so it's 6 o'clock. I think it's time to start drinking some wine. So I really would like to thank David again and Mauro for a great afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the great questions. And please, come tomorrow night. Hope everyone can come to the other talk where it's all Zach. And I'll probably I'll say some things which I never said in public before. So.
And I also really would like to thank Marco Comar for
Yes.
his
Yes.
presentation.